How can you not feel sorry about people who have died? I mean, you would be inhuman if you didn't think that. But when I'm asked whether I regret the decision, you know, I have to say I take responsibility for it, but I can't regret the decision.
In 1999, Tony Blair, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, spoke before the Chicago Economic Club and unveiled his doctrine of the international community, commonly known today as the Blair Doctrine, when he advised the Clinton administration that military interventions by NATO powers could be justified anywhere, even though we are not directly threatened. This doctrine more generally called for the end of the Westphalian era, an era in international relations defined by collaboration between nations on the most paramount of global affairs without violating the national sovereignty of those nations. In the Blair post-Westphalian world, sovereignty is an archaic model of the past to be supplanted by the supranational financier organizations centered primarily in the City of London and Wall Street, and their supranational militaries, like NATO, to actively intervene in the affairs of nations, overthrowing governments and hurting the peoples of what formerly were known as nations in the name of humanitarian intervention. In 2004, following the 9/11 attacks and the Iraq War, Blair continued to push this doctrine, lecturing Europe and the UN about the need for preemptive war and imperial reach in a speech in Sedgefield, England. He said at the time, "Everything about our world is changing. Its economy, its technology, its culture, its way of living. If the 20th century scripted our conventional way of thinking, the 21st century is unconventional in almost every respect." So for me, before September 11th, I was already reaching for a different philosophy in international relations, from a traditional one that has held sway since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Namely, that a country's international affairs are for it, and you don't interfere unless it threatens you or breaches a treaty or triggers an obligation of alliance. I did not consider Iraq fitted into this philosophy. Indeed, he didn't. It was the weapons of mass destruction assessment of the British government under Blair that not only was faked in order to achieve Blair's new doctrine in international affairs, with the senseless war in Iraq, but also left the stench of foul play all over the now deceased David Kelly, who met his fatal demise following the exposure of the fraudulent, sexed-up intel that thrust us into the Iraq War. In the United States, if there was anything that defined the George W. Bush administration, it was this dubious process solidifying the United States as a junior partner in the imperial war games of the British imperial system. We provide the brawn, and they provide the bane. And that is how the age-old conflict between the American patriots versus the British Tories and their cronies in the United States has been reflected in current history.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
faithfully the office of President of the United States.
Now, just in case you think this process ended with the election of Barack Obama, try this on for size. Tony Blair is advising the Obama re-election campaign.
So help you God?
So help me God.
This past weekend, in typically understated fashion, the British press revealed that 6 months ago, Blair privately advised Obama on how he could win his re-election. For the past 2 months or so, Blair has pretty much camped out in the United States and has plans to continue to do so. This should be no surprise, given that Blair was an advisor to Obama in his first election and has had his signature on every evil policy Obama has implemented, including the healthcare reform, modeled on Britain's NHS policy instituted under Tony Blair, whose crown jewel was the denial of healthcare and what is now referred to as the death panels. Also, Obama has carried out the Blair Doctrine, with preemptive war typified by the illegal war and political assassination in Libya, followed by the newly established right to protect policy, mandating a panel of individuals outside of our branches of government to determine which governments they should overthrow. And an outgrowth of this policy, and the most egregious to date, is the statement last week that NATO heads alone, outside of parliaments and governments, should have the right to decide and execute regime change of any nation on the planet. The latter policy in particular is the issue of the conflict currently being harbored by the United States against Russia, and the issue that Tony Blair has fought much of his adult life to destroy: sovereignty. This is the issue that Russia in particular has stated they will defend all the way to the level of nuclear war.
А примеров посягательств на доктрину суверенитета в последние годы было очень немало. Чего стоят и военные операции против иностранных государств в обход Организации Объединенных Наций, заявление о том, что тот или иной политический режим потерял легитимность, причем заявление со стороны иностранных государств, а не со стороны народа соответствующей страны, введение всяческих коллективных санкций в обход международных институтов. Все это не улучшает ситуацию в мире, а последствия скоропалительных военных операций в иностранных государствах обычно заканчиваются одним – приходом к власти радикалов. Я уже не говорю, что в какой-нибудь момент такие действия, которые подрывают государственный суверенитет, могут закончиться вполне себе такой полноценной региональной войной. И даже, никого не хочу пугать, с применением ядерного оружия. Об этом должны помнить все.
So this is where we stand. The United States involved in yet another conflict due to their special relationship or special dictatorship Britain has maintained from the Bush administration till now. Only this time, the conflict threatens to wipe out the entire human race with the threat of nuclear war. This means that removing Obama from office before the November elections is the most important thing we could do and achieve, because it would also remove Tony Blair. It removes the British control and manipulation our government has been suffering for over 10 years. Now, this does not mean that Mitt Romney is any better. In fact, he's just the other side of the same coin Obama is minted on. Both are puppets of a British intention antithetical to everything we as free Americans represent. The challenge in this election is not to choose from the lesser of two evils, as we, a demoralized American population, are so prone to do. The challenge is to reestablish the United States Constitution, to reestablish the one thing that the British imperial system has never forgiven our nation of achieving, and that, once again, is our sovereignty. That is the importance of this election season. That's the importance of the LaRouche Pact policy for the reestablishment of our Constitution and economic recovery. Glass-Steagall will enable us to reclaim our independence from the American wing of the British financial system in Wall Street and in the Federal Reserve. Establishing a third national bank will allow us to use the credit created by Congress under our Constitution to build our way out from underneath the current collapsing economy. But these are just the means to a beginning, in fact, in building the North American Water and Power Alliance, creating 6 million productive jobs as the economic driver to a full-on recovery of the United States economy as a whole. That is our second American Revolution, clearly defined. The question is, will you, instead of that perspective, settle for the lesser of two evils, even though both of those lesser evils are controlled by a much greater one called the British Empire? Or will you join us to saturate the United States with our future-oriented perspective so that our courage will inspire a new prospective leader to challenge and supplant not only the Tony Blair doctrine, but anyone in our country disgusting enough to call themselves president or candidate while carrying out such a doctrine.